Hi, this is Margaret Byrd and welcome to Color Quest. Check out that flower behind me. That is Coreopsis, and this is just one of the many varieties here at the Color Farm. It is being lovingly grown and tended to by Amy and Max, and they've been kind enough to invite me out here for several visits so that I can explore and enjoy the incredible bounty of natural dye flowers that they're growing here. So today on Color Quest, I want to look a little bit more closely at the Coreopsis and look to see what color fresh Coreopsis will bring to the dye pot, and if for some reason that is different than dry Coreopsis. Now, prior to coming out here and visiting Bailey Farm, where I found just one Coreopsis plant, I have never used fresh Coreopsis. When I first put it into my different echo print processes, I was blown away by the color. So prior to using fresh Coreopsis, I had purchased from a wonderful natural dye store, and that is Botanical Colors. They have many different dye plants that you can purchase, and that is where I purchased my first Coreopsis, but they were dried. So what I'd like to do is look at how these fresh Coreopsis might compare to the dried Coreopsis. No clue if the color is going to be any different, but always curious and always interested in experimenting. I'm going to try that out today in Color Quest. So let's grab some of these Coreopsis and head back to see what color these beautiful dye plants are going to bring us today. So what did you think about the differences? Once again, utilizing different processes and just experimenting with different ways to play around with the color has brought us a really wide range of a color palette. Again, Coreopsis, thank you. Which did you like better? I thought that the fresh flowers actually produced more color, but in fact, I think all 4 ways did. What surprised me was that it didn't look like the second exhaust bath that I was going to do with the dry flowers was going to produce any color at all. And when I went to pull out the samples, I was blown away with actually how deep and rich those colors were as well. The original fresh flower bath had more of a brown cast to it than I expected, and was super surprised when I had a more vibrant orangey cast to the exhaust bath on the fresh flowers. So really, every single time I pulled out the samples from each one of those dye pots, whether it be the original or the exhaust, each one really surprised me, pleasantly surprised me. Now, Coreopsis does grow in the summer months, and it can have multiple blooms throughout the season. However, if you want to be able to use Coreopsis at another time of year, the dried is a great option. You'll notice that I used a fraction of the weight of dried as I did to fresh. As a matter of fact, for the fresh, I used 1:1, which was recommended. On the dry, I cut that down to 20% of the weight of fabric. As you probably know, the most important thing is the weight of the dye matter to the weight of the dry fabric. It really doesn't have anything to do with the volume of the water or the liquid. That is more just making sure you have enough liquid to support the ability to move your textile around. The strength of the dye really has to do with a match based upon the weight of the dye matter and the weight of the fabric. And 1:1 is always a great place to start. But with dried, you really don't know, right? Because flowers are dried. Not entirely sure how much dye each one of those dried petals is going to provide. So I thought I got a great amount from both in terms of the vibrancy of the color that I got. If you want to try to stay local or timely to your season, then by all means, just use Coreopsis fresh, and then that will force you to be using and exploring different types of dye matter in the different seasons. However, if you don't have access, dry is always an option. Why not? Maybe if you have access to fresh and you have too many, you might learn how to dry your Coreopsis. I think that would be a great option as well too. So just know that all of those are great ways to be able to have color year round and be able to save color. I wanted to work with an exhaust bath this time because an exhaust bath is something that you may not think to do. And you'll notice in many of my videos here that I will have you save the dye even after it's been utilized, or even for that matter, save the dye matter after it's been used once for color extraction. And as you saw here, the exhaust bath from the Coreopsis was equally as lovely. And I got a lot of additional color out from the exhaust bath. Now, some people who are natural dyeing will take an initial extraction in the first bath, then they will take a second extraction from an exhaust bath, and maybe they'll even try it a third time. And then they'll take all of those baths and they'll blend them together. In that way, they've created one uniform dye bath that has pulled as much color as possible from the dye source. I like to separate them so that I expand my color palette. It's one of my favorite things to do. So try out exhaust baths. Don't just dye something once or use a dye one time. You will know when there's no more color to be had, and you will certainly have a nice, wide, and beautiful color palette in the meantime. And finally, what about that fifth color that I pulled? By adding soda ash to the dye bath, I played with the pH content in the dye bath, and I read that soda ash, just a pinch, would change it to have a more reddish hue, and that's exactly what happened. That means that Coreopsis is in fact pH sensitive. So keep that in mind. I have had a video or two here utilizing soda ash and showing a homemade soda ash that I made simply by baking soda. It's a pretty easy step to do. You can see that video link here and go check that out to learn how easy it is to make soda ash, and it's a great alkaline pH shifter that with certain plants like Coreopsis will bring you a different color. So as you can see around me, fall is definitely here. And the next dye plant I'd like to look at is the Hopi sunflower. Now, Hopi sunflower seeds have been a dye source for the Hopi community for centuries. And it makes a fairly remarkable color. So join me next week on Color Quest as we look at what this amazing sunflower seed can bring in our dye pot. And I think you may be surprised. Thanks so much for being here. I hope you're having a wonderful autumn season if you're on this side of the equator, and welcoming spring if you are on the other side of the equator. No matter where you are, there is some incredible natural color just waiting to be discovered. So get out there in nature and go see what you can find to bring some incredible organic color into your life. Have a great week. I will see you next Friday. Now, some people will... Oh my gosh.